colony with a puppet regime and announced the signing of a cooperation pact with Donetsk and Luhansk. It came amid a spike in skirmishes there that prompted Putin to order forces to, quote, maintain peace in the regions. The Kremlin decree left unclear when or even whether troops would enter Ukraine, but the announcement raised fears that an invasion was imminent, if not already underway. With an estimated 150,000 Russian troops massed on three sides of Ukraine, the U.S. has warned that Moscow has already decided to invade. Putin has said Ukraine's close ties to NATO are a threat to Russian security, and he is willing to take countermeasures to protect his country. The move comes after President Joe Biden and Putin tentatively agreed to a possible meeting in a last-ditch effort to avoid war. Though if Russia's federal court, which found the administration lacked the authority to raise the estimate of the real-world costs of projects on the climate, will affect dozens of rules by at least 4 federal agencies, among them an indefinite delay in planned lease sales on public lands. The ruling will also delay plans to restrict methane waste emissions from natural gas drilling on public lands, a court-ordered plan to develop energy conservation standards for manufactured housing, and a $2.3 billion federal grant program for transit projects. The administration says it remains committed to offsetting climate impacts and will continue to move forward with reforms. Troops to the Baltic nations on NATO's eastern flank bordering Russia came as Russian troops rolled into rebel-held areas in eastern Ukraine, after Putin said he was recognizing the independence of the separatist region, in defiance of U.S. and European demands. Speaking at the White House, Biden said the Kremlin had flagrantly violated international law.
Who in the Lord's name does Putin think gives him the right to declare new so-called countries on territory that belong to his neighbors? None of us should be fooled. None of us will be fooled. There is no justification. Further Russian assault in Ukraine remains a severe threat in the days ahead. And if Russia proceeds, it is Russia and Russia alone that bears the responsibility.
Western nations sought to present a united front, with more than 24 European governments agreeing to levy their own initial set of sanctions against Russian officials. Germany also said it was halting the process of certifying the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline from Russia. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he has canceled plans to meet his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Geneva later this week, saying Russia's actions indicate Moscow is not serious about a diplomatic path to resolving the crisis. The federal court, which found the administration lacked the authority to raise the estimate of the real-world costs of projects on the climate, will affect dozens of rules by at least 4 federal agencies, among them an indefinite delay in planned lease sales on public lands. The ruling will also delay plans to restrict methane waste emissions from natural gas drilling on public lands, a court-ordered plan to develop energy conservation standards for manufactured housing, and a $2.3 billion federal grant program for transit projects. The administration says it remains committed to offsetting climate impacts and will continue to move forward with reforms.
Handed down against Russia, those gas prices will only go higher. Also being impacted is your cybersecurity. The Department of Homeland Security issued a warning about the potential for cyber attacks as tensions grow between the U.S. and Russia.
I think we cannot rule out at all the possibility that Russia will indeed get engaged in hybrid warfare and attacks. But again, there are ways to deal with them.
The Fed says there is not a credible cyber threat against the U.S., but it's always good to be prepared. You can stay up to date on the tensions
and stand ready with more depending on Russia's next move.
If Russia goes further, we will impose more costs, which will continue to be swift and severe.
The U.S. ambassador to the UN warns a war in Ukraine could lead to a refugee crisis, with 5 million people potentially displaced. In Washington, Caroline Shively, Fox News.
Just 26% of Americans say the U.S. should have a major role in the crisis between Ukraine and Russia. That is according to a new poll from the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research. 52% say the U.S. should play a minor role, and 20% say our country should simply stay out of the conflict.
Federal court, which found the administration lacked the authority to raise the estimate of the real-world costs of projects on the climate, will affect dozens of rules by at least 4 federal agencies, among them an indefinite delay in planned lease sales on public lands. The ruling will also delay plans to restrict methane waste emissions from natural gas drilling on public lands, a court-ordered plan to develop energy conservation standards for manufactured housing, and a $2.3 billion federal grant program for transit projects. The administration says it remains committed to offsetting climate impacts and will continue to move forward with reforms.
He says Russia has targeted Ukraine's military infrastructure, and Ukrainians, they were urged to stay home and not to panic. Now, President Joe Biden, he pledged new sanctions to punish Russia for the aggression. He released this statement overnight, reading in part, quote, "The prayers of the entire world are with the people of Ukraine tonight as they suffer an unprovoked and unjustified attack by Russian military forces." President Putin has chosen a premeditated war that will bring a catastrophic loss of life and human suffering. Russia,
particularly with its Air Force. What we now see is that in addition to missile strikes in the capital, Kyiv, and the eastern city of Kharkiv, and in the south port city of Odessa, we're now seeing Russian ground troops getting closer and closer to the capital of Kyiv. And the Ukrainian government believes that the Russian offensive's objective is to encircle Kyiv and to topple the government. So as you can imagine, it is absolutely terrifying for many of the residents, particularly in the capital, and they're now trying to flee. There are huge lines of cars of people trying to get to safer location. At the moment, where I'm standing in Lviv is the safest place in Ukraine, but still people here are very worried, stocking up on supplies, worried that the situation could still get much worse.
Now, Tika, you mentioned a couple things we're looking at back here at home. We're hearing reports of more than 40 people dead from those early attacks right now, and we're seeing some of that video showing the massive traffic backups you've mentioned out of Kyiv. What are people there believing is going to happen next? Do you feel people were prepared for this? We've been hearing about it, but these long lines perhaps showing us something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to understand that even though the U.S. has been warning Ukraine for weeks now of the possibility of invasion, Ukraine as a country has been dealing with the threat of war from Russia for the last 8 years. So for many Ukrainians, they just didn't believe it would happen, or that if it would happen, it would be isolated to only a certain area of the country. So the fact that
he says Russia has targeted Ukraine's military infrastructure, and Ukrainians, they were urged to stay home and not to panic. Now, President Joe Biden, he pledged new sanctions to punish Russia for the aggression. He released this statement overnight, reading in part, quote, "The prayers of the entire world are with the people of Ukraine tonight as they suffer an unprovoked and unjustified attack by Russian military forces." President Putin has chosen a premeditated war that will bring a catastrophic loss of life and human suffering. Russia.
It's a false assertion on the part of Putin, but that's what he's telling the people in Russia tonight, or this morning, Thursday morning in Russia. In a statement, President Biden says he denounces, quote, "the unprovoked and unjustified attack on Ukraine, pledges the world will hold Russia accountable." President Biden says he will monitor the situation overnight and is scheduled to meet with G7 counterparts in the morning. The White House expected to announce more sanctions tomorrow, and we are supposed to hear from the president tomorrow, President Biden, to address the nation.
It'll be $4 by the end of the week.
Dead. Radar arrays, vehicles, and other equipment were seen burning at a Ukrainian military facility outside another eastern city after it was hit with airstrikes. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has now declared martial law, saying Russia has targeted Ukraine's military infrastructure. While President Biden meets with other G7 leaders today, a meeting of NATO ambassadors has also convened to assess Russia's attack on Ukraine. Ukraine is not a member, but it does share borders with several other NATO member nations. Overnight oil prices, many Americans are looking for ways to use less gas, and Tolly Anderson has a few tips to maximize our fuel economy.
This time around the nation, prices are even higher, driven largely by elevated crude oil prices. And gas prices have already skyrocketed 40% compared to this time last year. According to AAA, over the past week, prices have climbed even higher, 4 cents higher. And now, an average of gas is $3.48 per gallon nationwide. While prices in states go up and down weekly and can easily shift positions due to a variety of factors that play into how much prices will increase or decrease in each state. But currently, the price of oil is being swayed by tensions between Russia and Ukraine, and it accounts for about half of what consumers pay at the pump. Some of the states with the largest increase in just the last 7 days include New Mexico, coming in with an 18-cent increase, Delaware, 15, North Carolina, 12, New York, 10 cents, and Georgia at 8 cents. But there are some tips and tricks to maximize your fuel.
It'll be $4 by the end of the week.
You didn't mention SWIFT in your sanctions that you announced. Is there a reason why the U.S. Isn't doing that? Is there a disagreement among allies regarding SWIFT and whether Russia should be allowed to be a part of it?
The sanctions that we proposed on all their banks have of equal consequence, maybe more consequence than SWIFT, number one. Number two, it is always an option, but right now that's not the position that the rest of Europe wishes to take. Cecilia Vega, ABC.
Sir, sanctions clearly have not been enough to deter Vladimir Putin to this point. What is going to stop him? How and when does this end? And do you see him trying to go beyond Ukraine? And a second question I'll just give to you now. This statement that he gave last night, the threat that he gave, the West will face consequences greater than any you have faced in history. Is he threatening a nuclear strike?
I have no idea what he's threatening. I know what he has done, number one. And number two, no one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening. This is going to take time, and we have to show resolve so he knows what's coming. And so the people of Russia know what he's brought on them. That's what this is all about. This is going to take time. It's not going to occur. He's going to say, oh, my God, these sanctions are coming. I'm going to stand down. He's going to test the resolve of the West to see if we stay together, and we will. We will, and it will impose significant costs on him.
Will he go beyond Ukraine, sir? Do you see him going beyond?
Yes.
You get a 10 cents off if you pay cash. Strange.
The difference between Wall Street and Main Street, but everybody seems to be in for some economic pain. How economically painful is it going to get for people in this country? And I do have one more question.
First of all, there's no doubt that when a major nuclear power attacks and invades another country, that the world is going to respond, and markets can respond all over the world. So there's no doubt about that, number one. Number two, the notion that this is going to last for a long time is highly unlikely as long as we continue to stay resolved in imposing the sanctions we're going to impose on Russia, period. What's your next question? I'm sorry.
The next question is, did you underestimate Putin, and would you still describe him the way that you did in the summer as a worthy adversary?
At the time, I made it clear as an adversary, and I said he was worthy. I didn't underestimate him. And I've read most of everything he's written. Did you read I'm not being a wise guy. You heard the speech he made, almost an hour's worth of speeches, why he was going into Ukraine. He has much larger ambitions in Ukraine. He wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union. That's what this is about. And I think that his ambitions are completely contrary to the place where the rest of the world has arrived.